So first of all, let me welcome all of you to this workshop. It's a real pleasure to have such a great group participating here. I'd also like to thank, like Rahul did, the Simons Foundation for hosting it, and Daria for supporting it. And then here's a great man, so congratulations to Jean. And knowing Jean, of course, retirement means nothing. He's as active as ever. So I think I first met Jean, I think around 1984 or so. I took a class from him, I remember. And so I've known him for almost like 60% of my life. And I count him as a close friend, apart from being a colleague, and it's been one of the high points so far, so congratulations. So my job here right now is just to serve as I guess, the master of ceremonies for the first two lectures. And the first speaker is going to be Professor P.R. Kumar. Looking around me and seeing this crowd, I think it's perfectly obvious that Kumar needs no introduction. So I guess all I'll say is that he was already a legend in research when I was a graduate student. So that should give you some idea of how great he is. And he's always been held up actually, in our internal discussions as one of the exemplars of research style. There's at least three major things that all of us know about. So one is definitive work in adaptive control from his early career. Then all his work on manufacturing lines, where these fantastic Lou Kumar counterexamples and various questions that are still being studied. And then more recently, the work on scaling laws for wireless networks. And there's lots of research topics that have had a huge impact that I'm also leaving out. So on that note, let me hand it over.
Is this on?
Yours is on.
I don't need this, right?
You don't need that.
Okay. So it's a great honor to be here for Jean's retirement. But I think for people like Jean and Praveen and all, this word retirement doesn't mean retirement. It probably just means that you won't have a class every semester. Okay? And I'm sure he'll be applying to Daria for contracts and so on. So, yeah, so this is we need to redefine this word. Okay, so Jean has had an illustrious career of research achievements. And I just thought I'd mention a few of them that, to me are just things that I'll always remember. Beautiful early work on flows in queuing networks, characterizing when they're Poisson, when delays are independent. There's this non-overtaking condition. And this little gem of a work I really like. If all of you know queuing networks know that if you have feedback, the process is not Poisson. And it's always a mystery. Why is it? It's a horrible process. It is not Markov-Neel, none of those things. But yet it has this geometric steady-state distribution. And I think Jean's beautifully simple explanation of adding a delay and then taking the delay going to zero is just fantastic. So very unnoticed thing, small note probably, but a jewel. Okay. Then all this very nice work on quick simulations with Shyam Parekh and so on. Swapping of arrivals and services and so on. Also very elegant use of coupling, etc. to prove results. In fact, there was a paper about 40 years ago or so that me and my student wrote a humongous long paper, and I think Jean followed it up with a, couple-page short proof based on coupling. Fantastic. Multi-arm bandits, again, simple proof, interchange, even to that well-studied area. Their proof was very, very nice. Then, of course, more recently on CSMA, seminal work on max weight for input queued switches. In the early days of ATM, God knows what happened to ATM, but decoupling, I think it lives on in MPLS or something like that. Decoupling bandwidth, this notion. And then more recently, network security, economics of networks, network games, and so on and so forth. But more also than the research, he's also been a role model for research values, okay, not just in what is a minimum publishable unit, but also in the presentation style, and very high standard for theoretical results, role model for research. His papers are completely shorn of adornment. In fact, I was tempted to coin a word today and define a new word, so somebody, if you want to use this in future works, credit me with it. Walrand, I suggest, is the antonym of the word hype. Okay? And that's not just hype, doesn't mean opposite, doesn't mean understatement. There's also some beautiful simplicity, getting to the heart of the matter, etc. So all his papers are just absolutely to the point, okay? Explain, get to the key idea in the simplest possible way. No sentence is wasted, but that also means that you have to read each and every sentence. Don't skip one sentence, or you'll miss a whole chapter in somebody else's book. And in the same style, lots and lots of books, okay? Again, and exemplary understatement, modesty. So to all-round is the antonym for hype, okay? And this, I put an exclamation mark because I would not have bet a penny on this. But he's also been a very successful entrepreneur and continuously held aloft very high standards for everybody to emulate, both in research and dissemination. Fantastic, and it's a great honor to have known him for so many decades. It's a smaller percentage of my life than Venkat's, but longer period. Okay. So, a long time ago, I was giving a talk. We had a Muri. We had a couple of Muris. Neshroff had a Muri, Jean had a Muri, and we used to have presentations. And I was giving one talk once on some delays or something, and John asked me, what about the strategic case? At that time, I didn't have an answer. But in a totally different area, I've been looking at some strategic things. So I thought I would talk about that. And as you all know, this is the work of my student K. Ma, who is somewhere. Where are you? K is there. So any questions, please ask him. All right. And okay, so what is this problem? So it's motivated by the problem of power systems. So there are many, many generators and loads. There's nuclear power plants, there's coal, there's wind, there's hydro power, and there's many loads. You can have storage services which may store and sell industrial loads, commercial loads, load-serving entities which are aggregators of many, many small loads, like an internet service provider or something. And they all have different dynamics, uncertainties, costs, and rewards. So for example, nuclear power plants like to maintain a constant output. Coal power plants, you can ramp them up, but they may take a certain time. So you have to make decisions on when to start ramping and so on. Wind, random. Hydropower, also random. Okay. Load-serving entities. So this is like an internet service provider. You collect together a bunch of smaller loads, say homes, and then you exploit their flexibility on when to turn ACs on or off, etc. And then thereby you try to match supply. Because big name of the game when you use renewable power is that you cannot adjust supply. So you have to change demand to meet supply. So these are trying some kind of an aggregator model. Then you have commercial models. So a commercial company like Walmart may decide to pre-cool its store in the morning and then cut it down in the afternoon when power is not expensive, and then turn it off entirely at night, whereas an industrial load may do something else. A storage service may decide to buy power when the price is low and then sell it when it's high, and so on. So there are many, many, many entities, and the point is that by and large, you need to exactly balance power and generation and consumption. There's a little bit that you can store in the inertia of the generators and also in the heating of the transmission line. But by and large, you have to maintain balance at all times. So you have all these stochastic entities, some controllable, some not, that you have to balance. And there is a thing called a system operator. In the US, it's in many places, it's an independent system operator called sitting right there, ISO. And the job of that system operator is to maintain balance at all times, but maximize social welfare. Social welfare is the sum of the utilities of everybody, okay? And we also have some objectives. We don't want to subsidize, so we want to maintain budget balance. And also things like individual rationality, that is somehow the pricing structure should be that people will participate in the market, not drop out. And also, even though there are things like which ensure truth telling, you want to charge a fair price. So I'm going to call that, you want to charge the Lagrange multiplier, okay? So I'm going to call that Lagrange optimality. And you need to do that without knowing the details of all these entities, the details of their models, their internal states, stochastics, etc. Now, of course, ISO can ask them, but they can lie. Example, Enron. And so the question is, how can the system operator operate? That's a fundamental problem. that K has been looking at. So the mathematical problem is there's a bunch of stochastic dynamical systems, standard state, control, noise, and the social planner's goal is to maximize there's a finite time horizon, there are a capital N agents, these are the utilities of the agents, and it wants to maximize the sum of the utility over a horizon of all the agents, and while maintaining balance at all times. Okay, total consumption equals generation, without knowing dynamics, utility functions, states, etc. So that's the problem. Now, in the deterministic case, there are solutions for this. Suppose the agent has a utility function, and it can lie and bid some other utility function. Then all of you are familiar with the VCG mechanisms. So we can construct a mechanism where the agent has to pay a price, make a payment PI, and the net utility or the quasi-linear net utility is the utility derives from the consumption of generation minus the payment. Okay, and the allocation. So after these people bid, the central planner chooses the allocation to maximize the social welfare or the reported social welfare. And this payment, you would like to define it in such a way that each agent internalizes the social externality. Okay, and so the VCG mechanism has a certain form of payment structure. Okay, basically, as I said, you internalize other people's utility, and it ensures incentive compatibility. That is, truth telling is a dominant strategy, and if it is unique, then you will do that. Okay, assuming some kind of rationality. Maximizes social efficient. It is socially efficient. That means it maximizes social welfare, and there's a more general mechanism where this part of the payment can be any function not including I's own reported utility. Okay. So this deterministic static case can be extended to deterministic dynamic cases in a very straightforward way, simply by looking at the entire open loop sequence as a decision. Okay, so it extends immediately, but and it extends so that when you report, I can ask you to report your dynamics, your initial conditions, everything, and then I can ensure truth telling is optimal, okay, or dominant. But in the stochastic dynamic case, the states of the agents are private random variables, okay, and the social welfare for optimal allocation, I need to know the states of these private systems, okay. So the social welfare planner needs to ensure that agents reveal their states. And in fact, this is the key part. Because there are disturbances and randomness occurring all over the place when you're dealing with wind and consumers and behaviors and so on, you want to take these disturbances into account in pricing and so on. Okay, I mean, if a turbine blade breaks or there's some excessive wind somewhere or whatever, so you want them to report the states, their own states. Okay, but there's a difficulty. Suppose we'll consider the case where the utility function and the dynamics are known, and suppose the social planner asks the agents to report their states. Okay, then the natural extension of the VCG mechanism is just to extend it by taking into account the cost over the time horizon and putting in some conditional expectations. Where U star is the optimal solution to this stochastic control problem. But the problem is that truth telling forms a subgame perfect Nash equilibrium, but it's not a dominant strategy. Okay? In other words, if everybody else is telling the truth, then you should respond truthfully, but it's not dominant. Okay? Because you could declare your states in a stochastically inconsistent way with the dynamics. So all this dynamic programming sort of optimality that you do just goes out of the window. So there's a fundamental obstacle in trying to extend VCG from deterministic to stochastic dynamic. Fundamental obstacle. Okay, there's yet another. We are ambitious. We even want to do more things. We also want to achieve budget balance. That is, the ISO should not need to subsidize the agents. And we want, so that's budget balance. Okay, the total payments are greater than or equal to 0. Individual rationality means that by participating, you don't get negatives, net utility. And there's another obstacle. There's no mechanism that can satisfy all these properties. Incentive compatibility, maximization of social welfare, budget balance, and individual rationality. So that doesn't exist. And I want one more objective. I want them to charge, everybody to be charged a fair price. That is, they should be charged the Lagrange multiplier, which would be the price in the absence of any strategic considerations and lying. Okay? Okay, so what can the social planner do? That's the issue. So is there any hope? And it turns out there is hope. In almost, I think, this may be the only case in which there is hope. It turns out that the good old linear quadratic Gaussian problem, I don't even think you need Gaussian. Well, Gaussian, you can, there are certain possibilities there. But the good old LQG case, actually, you can actually extend this theory. So this is the standard LQG problem. Okay, we're looking at the fully observed case, but you can do that for the partially observed. And I'm going to denote by capital XU the concatenated system, okay, of everybody. Okay. So the idea of incentive, so our idea is the following, okay? So at each time S, there will be a random disturbance that occurs to every agent, right? And I want them to declare their disturbances so I can price things properly and make the market efficient, okay? That's my goal. So the ISO charges a VCG payment taking into account the effect of the disturbance at this particular time on all future states and balancing for this particular disturbance. So we're going to do it disturbance by disturbance, okay, as we go along in time. So we're going to balance for each disturbance, okay? And there is some independence there, okay? So we're going to exploit all these things. And due to the superposition of these linear systems, the future states can be written as a sum of the effects of past disturbances. And the quadratic nature of the cause renders this additional interaction as a product, okay, some kind of product between independent variables. And then we can show an expectation that these things cancel out. And this will allow us to get ex ante results, okay? But ex ante, not in a is a little stronger in the sense that it's still conditional expectations, not just expectation, okay? All right, so here is so that's a broad idea. And the solution is the following. We call this a layered VCG mechanism. We'll ask agents to bid their states, their noises at time S-1. And then what we'll do is we'll propagate the system forward from this noise together with allocations which are based on this noise, okay? And the trajectory resulting from the particular disturbance at that time can be thought of, and then the superposition of these things will be the total state. So you look at all previous disturbances and look at their effect at time t, that will be the state. So that's superposition. And then similarly, we'll also decompose the allocations, okay? So that the total allocation, that is consumption of generation, is a sum of the allocations due to the individual disturbances. Okay, so in a similar way, the random social welfare, that is without the expectation, you can write it as the sum of layers of random social welfare in this way, but then there are quadratics, okay, because the state at time t is a superposition of many effects. And when you take quadratics, you'll get cross terms, okay? So there are cross terms of this sort. They can only be eliminated in expectation, and that is what I meant by ex ante, okay? So basically the scheme is the agent I bids a state which is effectively the noise at time s. The social plan maximizes the utility of that layer, if you will, and collects a payment in the standard VCG sort of a way or a Groves sort of a way. And now, in order to make this thing through, we need to, for the agents to be rational, okay? So what's the definition of rationality we need, okay? So it's like they need to be persistently rational. So in what sense? So I'm going to define this by backward induction, what I mean by rationality. I'll say that an agent almost at the very end is rational if there is a unique dominant strategy, then it will use that. Okay, so that's my definition of rationality at time t minus 1. But the uniqueness will come in because of the positive definiteness of the cost. Okay? All right. And then we'll say that it's rational at time t if it adopts a unique dominant strategy at time t when there is 1 under the assumption that all agents will be rational at future times. Okay? So under this persistent rationality assumption, truth-telling is a dominant strategy. Okay? But in the stochastic case, we do need to know the system dynamics and so on. In fact, there's a counterexample if the dynamics are not known. So unlike the deterministic case. Okay. The next question is, so this may be the only case that you can do the strategic problem in the stochastic dynamic case that I know of. Okay? Now, but we also want to go after budget balance and individual rationality. So how to ensure that these layered VCG payments satisfy budget balance and individual rationality? Very simple. I'm going to scale up the first Groves term in the payment by a factor C to try to achieve this balance. So we'll simply scale that. Okay? Or this is actually the VCG scheme. And that's what we call the scaled VCG mechanism. So this is an example of Groves now. Okay? Now we would like to choose this C to achieve balance. So we'd like to do a one-parameter scaling of these payments. There's a constant C for everybody. Okay? But if C is chosen as a function of the bids, then we lose the Groves property because this has to not depend on agent I's bid. Okay? All right. So, however, what we can show is that under a certain market power balance, which I'll define in a second, it turns out that there's a range of values of C that ensures budget balance and individual rationality. Okay? And the hope is that because these agents are always interacting in the marketplace, right? ISO is doing this, running this auction every day, right? Hopefully, it can get a knowledge of the range of C's that work or tune it to get budget balance. Okay? It's not just a unique value, it's actually a range. So that's the hope. And what is this market power balance condition? So take the optimal solution with agent I excluded, the optimal reward, and look at the maximum. So basically this maximum is the social welfare of everybody minus the least, the smallest fish, okay, in the pool. And we'll say that the outcome satisfies market power balance if the number of agents minus 1 times the max is less than this. So basically the way to interpret it is that no one agent has a humongous effect, okay, or too little an effect. Okay, and the theorem is that if the socially optimal outcome satisfies market power balance, then there is indeed a range of C's of tuning this parameter such that the scale VCG mechanism is incentive compatible, efficient, budget balance, and individual rational at the same time. And perhaps you can think of this market power balance condition as an economic justification for load aggregators. So you don't want these individual homes to participate in the marketplace. They're too small a fry. And if you aggregate them so that they all have kind of equal clout, more or less, then you can actually get social welfare maximization. Okay, but we also want more. We also want them to pay the fair price, okay, the Lagrange multiplier. So we have an asymptotic, we can show asymptotic Lagrange optimality. So Lagrange optimality simply means that for the constraint problem, if there's a unique solution for a unique solution, then the payment that you make is actually the payment of the price of the Lagrange multiplier times the allocation, okay? And what we can show is that if somehow these things are bounded, all these agents, then asymptotically as the number of agents increases, there is a range for each n, and these things satisfy the fact that they converge to 1. Okay? And we can get actually asymptotic Lagrange optimality. So as things scale up, you get the exact thing. If you have a large number of somewhat equally powerful contenders in this market power balance sense, then you get nearly the fair price for everybody. Okay, so some thoughts, okay, on what this scheme is. So today's bidding is essentially static, okay, and it doesn't allow for really genuine dynamic optimization of uncertain resources. So we want to exploit wind to the hilt, we want to exploit renewables to the hilt, but we also want to exploit the flexibility of consumers and so on. And all that is dynamic and stochastic, and it doesn't really allow that. So maybe wasteful of resources. So we definitely need a stochastic dynamic bidding scheme. Okay? Now, on the other hand, we also want to satisfy incentive compatibility, social welfare optimality, budget balance, individual rationality, and the correct price payment, some kind of fairness. So I call that Lagrange optimality. Now, so here's a proposal. The proposal is large LQG systems can today be solved. So even if you're an ISO and you have 1,000 people submitting LQG, then perhaps computationally this should be feasible nowadays. Okay? It can just run a big computer. And so can LQG become the workhorse of dynamic stochastic bidding? Okay, that's the suggestion. And there is some kind of precedent to that. I mean, if you open any textbook on power systems, there'll be the cost of, when they explain economic dispatch or anything like that, they'll always talk of the cost of generating a power P as a quadratic. Okay, so I talked to my power system colleague, they said, yeah, linear quadratic sums, okay, all right. So, and in the deterministic case, just tuning just one parameter can achieve all of this, just one parameter. And is it possible that because of repeated interactions, the prior knowledge that you acquire, is that enough to tune C? And perhaps it may be, of course, but if they game that learning also, then you get into a different thing. But is that a possibility? And does this market power balance condition for social welfare maximization provide economic justification for load aggregators as agents to permit social welfare maximization? And Kumar is investigating all these things at his new job in PNNL. Okay, so again, Jean, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and wish you the very best and continued success in everything.
Thanks for the great talk, Kumar.
Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions.
So I didn't understand. So your individual rationality and budget balance, they are ex post requirements?
No. Ex ante, but in a conditional expectation sense. But so let's think of ex post as almost surely, ex ante as expected value. So this is ex ante, but conditional expectation.
And there's of course an impossibility theorem which says in general you cannot achieve all four properties. So in that proof,
Yes.
so this is of course.
So this is not in general. I'm saying that given this system, there is a range,
Right.
and you want to tune in that range. If you say all systems, then there's an empty set. Yeah. So there is prior knowledge, and the question is, can you use prior knowledge to do these things?
I think Peter had a question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the impact of the number of market players. So, for instance, for the asymptotic Lagrange optimality,
Yeah.
do you have any idea how?
By the way, we're just writing this paper, so I think the convergence rate, you're asking the convergence rate, right?
1 over n.
Okay, there it is. Yeah. I think it's like law of large numbers kind of a thing or whatever, right?
Vijay, did you have a question?
I was wondering this market, the condition that you had, the market. So does that give you these properties for the static system as well?
For the what?
For a static system, for a standard VCG setting. If you have the
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. It would. It would. So for example, the deterministic LQ problem.
So not having a single powerful player.
Yeah, exactly. But powerful or weak. You have to interpret this properly. Yeah. Basically, agents are roughly. It's not. You're not comparing equation to equation. You're just saying in this influence they exert on the market at the end of the day, given their dynamics and utilities and so on, they're kind of comparable. That's what it says.
Darlene, did you have your hand? No. Oh, okay. Look, Vijay.
Oh, yeah. So just coming back to the budget balance and individual rationality, is it at every time step or is
Yes.
it? Okay.
No, actually, in the way we do it is we do it for every layer.
Okay.
I mean, that's stronger than what you would need if you just wanted to completely ex ante, right?
Yeah.
But actually, it does.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
most of the time you need it for time step. And so, I mean, I guess the one thing, I mean, there's also the Bergman-Valiumaki type mechanism which would operate in this context. How would what you have compare with what they are?
I don't know.
I think that's one
So
side.
that's,
I don't know.
they don't specialize to the LQG case, they look at a much broader problem.
Okay.
But that depends on using the fact that there's an optimal dynamic programming solution.
I see. Okay. I don't know. I have to see.
But they don't get budget balance. It's like a standard VCG version.
We could take one more question. It's a pressing need. No, thanks again.
Thank you.